Debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So here we are. We've returned to the House. We had a throne speech, we had a budget announcement, and now the Budget Implementation Act. And like other budgets before, I was hopeful about this budget. I was hopeful that it would be bold and visionary and that it would actually steer Canada towards a position of strength. But unfortunately, like other budgets, I was left disappointed. And Mr. Speaker, the piece that I am disappointed with maybe the most is the disconnect between the throne speech and the budget. Because in the throne speech, we actually had some pretty interesting language about an innovation and productivity agenda. And that really caught my eye. I was pretty excited about that language. But first of all, to even take that language at face value, we would have to do a little bit of ignoring of history, of recent history, because if we just think about the Nortel experience very recently, well, this government has essentially allowed Nortel to collapse before our very eyes. And this was a company that did the bulk of private sector research and development, and it made Canada a leader in telecommunications. And we just stood by watching it fold and watching all of that research, all of that knowledge, all of that innovation just get bought up by other countries. That knowledge was our knowledge. That knowledge is our knowledge, and now it's gone. And so if we add to that the fact that this government has utterly failed to at least try and protect the pensions of those knowledge-based workers, well, it doesn't really bode well for any future innovation and productivity agenda that this government purports to have. But despite, this recent example, and we think about the future, I was still optimistic about this productivity and innovation agenda. But if we think about how to best accomplish that agenda, really the moment was the stimulus budget, and it was another lost opportunity. Innovation requires basic infrastructure, such as broadband internet access and investments in energy infrastructure. And last year's stimulus budget was the perfect time to invest in those infrastructure basics. It would have created jobs, and it would have laid the groundwork for real innovation and productivity agenda. But they didn't act then. And this budget actually makes things worse. Their strategy is not to build infrastructure, but actually to deregulate. Deregulation has proven to stifle innovation, whereas investment has proven to boost it. We're on the wrong track, Mr. Speaker, and well, you might wonder why. What I see is that this government has its head stuck in the tar sands, and they're really unable to look beyond a tar sand growth strategy. And this is what's going to impede any innovation agenda, no matter how strong it is. Mr. Speaker, we know that Canada has a history of resource dependency, and this has led towards a historic tendency towards lower rates of productivity and innovation. Now, Canada has done fairly well as the hewers of wood, the drawers of water, and the pumpers of oil, but we have paid the price with a less productive economy. This is an economic history that's catching up to Canada. We have an aging population. Add to that the growing importance of innovation to participate in the world economy, as well as the ecological cost of a resource-dependent economy. And we find ourselves in a very difficult position when considering the future. It's one that demands vision and bold action. But sadly, this government's economic strategy thus far has been to get rich off the tar sands. We still offer subsidies to these companies, making Canada a dollar petrocurrency, making the Canadian dollar a petrocurrency that fluctuates. And these fluctuations make long-term value-added investments very difficult. And that doesn't sound like very much of an innovation strategy to me, Mr. Speaker. Now, we have been told that the problem is that Canada's business class was lazy, and reducing the tariff through free trade would whip them into shape. Free trade, corporate tax cuts, and deregulations was supposed to solve our productivity problem, but it hasn't. What it's done is reinforce our nation's dependence on resource exports, and it's hampered our government's ability to facilitate real innovation strategy. Innovation, almost by definition, it means doing something different. It means experimenting. It means promoting diversification of our economy. A laissez-faire approach will actually do the opposite. Giving tax cuts will increase profits to sectors that aren't a part of the cutting edge. But but they're actually a part of Canada's resource trap. A real strategy would provide direct support to entrepreneurs in the communities they are a part of. It would nurture them in early experimentation. It would help them network with other sectors and industries to facilitate knowledge exchange. It would give them basic infrastructure, and this does include social infrastructure, such as access to family security and strategies to gain community support for their endeavors. An innovation strategy for Canada needs to include social infrastructure that will support communities and support hubs of knowledge sharing and innovation. And this basic infrastructure must include housing. We're a country in desperate need of a national housing strategy, the only G8 country not to have this strategy. And my colleague from Vancouver East has introduced Bill C-304, and this would create a national housing strategy for this country, a strategy that would also incorporate the very latest environmental and energy efficiency standards into this framework. We could transform communities across Canada, not just by providing stable and affordable housing, but sustainable and energy efficient housing as well. A stable community, a housed community, a community that has the means to survive. This is a productive community. And yet, the overwhelming majority of Conservative MPs do not support our housing bill. And while the UK is committing to retrofit all homes by 2030 with firm interim targets, our government just announced that it's going to cancel the very successful Eco-Energy program, the Eco-Energy Home Retrofit program. According to Green Communities Canada, which was actually the first organization to deliver our National Home Energy Efficiency Program, well, GCC has said that this program has stimulated hundreds of millions of dollars in energy savings for Canadians. A program like this, it generates huge bill savings, but it also creates green jobs. And it improves our competitiveness, yet the program's being canceled. So we're fed the line that the answer is cut taxes, and we'll instantly become productive and competitive. Well, Mr. Speaker, I recently attended a showing of Poor No More, this Canadian documentary, and it was shown here on the Hill, and it did a great job of dispelling this myth, and it actually took a look at Ireland, because Ireland is often held up as being, an example of a country that cut all of its corporate taxes and then it succeeded economically, so we should follow that model. But the example of Ireland is much more complex, much more nuanced than that. And one piece of that puzzle is the fact that they have free post-secondary education. Ireland is committed to educating its citizens, to educating them and inspiring them, and creating a strong, competitive, and knowledgeable workforce that is the perfect breeding ground for innovation and productivity. We need to take that kind of bold action in Canada, Mr. Speaker. We need to ensure that every generation of Canadians has access to training and education in order to maximize the nation's productivity and responsiveness to new trends in research. We need to remove barriers to post-secondary education and stop the year-to-year increases in debt-laden graduates. And as the NDP critic for First Nations, Inuit and Métis Affairs, focusing on urban Aboriginal issues, it's of particular interest to me that Aboriginal Friendship Centres have again been left out of this budget. Friendship Centres need increased funding to provide services, to renovate their crumbling buildings, and to better their technological capabilities. They're the heart of the urban Aboriginal community, and we've learned that about half of our First Nations people actually live in urban centres. These are vital to Canadian urban centres. They're a hub of activity and culturally appropriate programming and community collaboration. They deserve a fair shake, and they're an economically sound investment. Mr. Speaker, if you invest in social infrastructure, add to that investment in other infrastructures that will specifically support innovation, well, we can start to piece together an innovation strategy for Canada. Could you imagine? It can be done. We know historically that certain technologies have created waves of innovation and that nations can position themselves strategically within these dynamics to achieve economic performance. And in the last century, we saw growth position around oil, around automobile and mass production, as well as a move towards an economy based on information and communications technologies. Last year, we found ourselves in a recession. Well, this was an opportunity, because typically recessions are periods of change, when new periods of technology break through. And this is why the Conservatives' scattershot stimulus spending was so short-sighted. They've run up a deficit with nothing to show for it, and they've failed to position Canada for the next wave of innovation. And the next wave is very likely to be one based on ecologically friendly technologies. It has to be if we're going to avoid catastrophic climate change. This is where Canada should be building new knowledge and expertise and encouraging entrepreneurship. Now, the NDP has already fostered successful cooperation with our green car industrial strategy. The Conservatives, on the other hand, are pushing against this wave, as we've seen in their attempts to stall.
You are out of time. We'll go now to questions and comments to the honourable member from the U.